Hello everyone, Ron Johnson here from L.T.L Tutoring Central. And if you're looking for tips and strategies to help with your learning, you are in the right place. Today I'm talking about creative writing, specifically how to get started. A lot of people ask, I want to write a story or I must write a story. You might have to write a fictional story for school or an assignment. And where do I begin? How do I start? I just look at a blank page or a blank computer screen and I have no idea how to start. So this video is all about a few basics to help you get started with creative writing. So let's get started ourselves and have some fun with this. Let's start with three components that every story has: characters, setting, and plot. And I've introduced them in no specific order. I've just started with characters, but I could have started with one or the other. It's not in order of importance or anything like that. The characters, of course, are the people or the actors within your story, whether that's a short story or a novel. But characters don't have to be people, as you've probably read stories with animals in them, and sometimes the animals even speak. So characters can be animals. Characters can be inanimate objects like tables. It could be a tree. I think Edward Rutherford wrote about a tree being a main character in his novel The Forest, if I remember correctly. So a character, you don't have to limit yourself to characters being people, but in general, they are the actors within your story. Setting is the time and place of your story. You might have only one setting or you might have multiple settings. Now this could be dictated by the length of your story. If you're writing a very short story, you'll probably only have one or two settings. If you're writing a longer short story or a novel or a novella, you will perhaps have many settings, but not necessarily. The time can be one space of time. It could be just one day or 1 hour, but then again, it could be a year or multiple years or even centuries, particularly in a longer novel. The place or location could be in a home, could be in just one room, particularly for a very short story. But for a longer story or a novel, you may have many locations. You may have geographic locations all around the world, or you might, if it's science fiction or fantasy, you might go even beyond the world and go out into the universe. So there are lots of choices and options. Again, some of that will be dictated by the size of the story and, of course, the type of story you're writing. But just remember that the setting is the time and the place. And the time could be chronological. It could start at the beginning, work through the middle and toward the end. But you can also have stories that have flashbacks. So you have multiple time periods happening throughout the story. And you can also have time periods looking into the future and then looking at the current time or the past time. So there's a lot of things that you can play around with in terms of time and also location, and those are your settings. Plot is basically the series of events. In other words, what is going to be happening in the story. And you, in a very short story, may have only one plot. And in a longer story or novel, you could have multiple plots. But some novels have basically one plot. There will be a lot of events within that plot, but one plot. Now you might be asking yourself, well, what does this have to do with getting me started on the creative writing path, or how does this help me to start writing a creative or fiction story? Well, you can use these major components to help you make a plan or do some brainstorming and come up with some ideas. And I'm going to talk again a little bit about the characters, the setting, and the plot, and then we're going to add a couple more concepts of conflict and climax. So you can begin with any of these. I didn't put these in a specific order, but you could start with characters. So if you're going to write a story, you could think of, okay, what kind of characters do I want to have in my story? You don't have to start with characters. You could start with setting or you could start with plot. It doesn't really matter. But you could start with characters. And how do you do that? Well, think of yourself, first of all. Think of your own qualities and your own thoughts, but also think of the people around you. Think of family members. Think of friends. Think of coworkers or classmates if you're in a school situation. And you can even watch strangers. You can do people watching. I love people watching. It's very interesting. And I often, if I'm going for a walk or if I happen to be where there's a lot of people around. I will, not stalk people, but I'll look at people, I'll watch people, or I'll see something happening in the community. And many times I will create a story in my mind. So I could even just see a person passing in a car and think, okay, what kind of person is this? And create a caricature or a storyline in my head about this particular person. It might have absolutely nothing. In fact, it probably has absolutely nothing to do with that kind of person. I could make this person into a villain, and it might be the kindest person on earth. I don't know this person. It's a stranger. So it doesn't matter, though. For me, it's just using something I see and my own imagination to start developing some ideas that might work in a story, and that can begin with character. And it could be a character that's going to do something amazing in the world, it creates something. It could be a character that's evil, that's going to be a problem, or anything in between. So characters is one way you can start. You can think, what is my protagonist or my main character going to be? Is there going to be an antagonist? If so, what kind of character is that going to be? And then all the supporting roles if you have multiple characters within a story. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes there's only one. You could begin, or you could start thinking about setting. Now, how will that help? When I'm writing my stories, I often start either with characters or plot. And they don't always come characters first, plot second, setting third. They don't really come in an order like that. They often sort of come together, and it's difficult to say which came first, the chicken or the egg. But I'll often start with those more than the setting for me. But sometimes the setting triggers a story or an idea. And so think of settings. You can obviously think of your own home, but you can also think of places you've been, like the park, like the train station, like a museum, a school, anywhere really. Any location can be a setting. And so if you're driving, or if you're out walking or hiking, or whatever you do in your daily life, always pay attention to what's around you. Like, pay attention to the characters, the people around you. Pay attention to the setting. What does it look like? What kind of feeling does it give you? Do you get a sense from certain settings? Because often you do, and it might be a very happy, very joyful feeling or sense, or it may be a bit frightening, or it may be eerie, or there's many feelings you can get from various settings. And it might differ at different times in your own uh, psychology, but also a time of day can make a difference in the setting. But experience the settings that you actually have every day, but you can also use settings from movies and books you've read, and you can do the same with characters. You don't want to write someone else's story, but if you've read about different characters, for example, if you're interested in mystery novels or science fiction type stories, you can borrow ideas, let's say. Don't plagiarize. You don't want to steal wholesale their story. You want to write your own story, but you can get ideas, because there's really nothing new under the sun. Everybody sort of borrows or learns from other authors, other writers. So there are many ways that you can incorporate both characters and setting and start getting some ideas. Plot is another one. That's a series of events, remember. It's what's going to happen in your story. And again, you can certainly think of some ideas from books and movies or other stories that you've read or heard about, but also your own life. What has happened in your life, what has happened, what stories have you heard from friends, neighbors, co-workers. Again, going through all the people that you see, well, maybe not every day, but within your life. And so you probably have a lot more stories in your mind than you know. Now, you're not writing their story exactly, but that can be the seed or the kernel. And then you start asking. I have written a blog. You can go have a look at that too. It's a little bit different than what I'm saying here in the video, but there's some similarities. And one good thing to do is say, what if? So maybe one day you went for a car ride to a popular tourist location. What if there had been a car crash? there wasn't, but what if there were? So you see, you're not writing the actual story, what happened that day, because many people say to me when they're trying to write something, well, everything in my life is boring. Well, first of all, that's probably not true. They just haven't really thought about it enough. But secondly, sure, a lot of the things we do every day, it's not exciting. It might not create a novel. It might not even create a short story. But if we start putting the what ifs in, if we start putting in some new characters, change the setting a little bit, we can create that fictional story from that kernel or that seed of reality or experience that we have. So what if your teacher is an international spy, your professor is maybe secretly murdering people? What if you lost your child? What if, you know, whatever? You can think of a million different what ifs, and that can start to create your plot because you start answering those questions and you start thinking what characters would be involved in this what if. And where would the setting be? Where would this all happen? And what time frame are we talking about? So that gets your characters, your setting, and your plot. You don't have to have this all planned out ahead. I'm going to talk about conflict and climax and then say a little bit more about the plan. So most stories have conflict, sometimes one conflict, sometimes multiple conflicts, and a climax. So it's not always obvious that there's a climax, but in some cases it's very obvious. And a climax is just there's a building of suspense throughout the story, and then you reach sort of the peak of excitement or you're near the end of the story, and there's not always a solution, but you're getting close to the solution. That's the climax, and then right after the climax is the resolution, it's called in short story writing, and that's when there is a solution or a non-solution because sometimes there isn't a solution to the conflict. So throughout the story you have a conflict or maybe several conflicts that the characters are trying to solve. So you know, someone has been kidnapped and the detective or maybe the parents are trying to find the child that's been kidnapped. So there's conflicts along the way with the kidnappers or possibly with a police officer who doesn't believe them, or you've seen and read these kinds of stories. Those are the conflicts, and there can be conflicts within a person. I often write about this kind of conflict in my stories, the conflict within the mind, the conflict within ourselves, and dealing with everyday life, things that we have to do all the time. Again, you can think, well, that can be very boring. Well, it's not very boring in your own life. If you've been stressed or anxious, you realize that that takes a toll and it's not boring at all. But you do have to think, how can I write it so someone else can enter into that world and feel something? And I think that's often very important. It's important for me at any rate. And then those conflicts generally lead to the climax, the sort of epitome of what's going to happen, and then often you have a resolution of some kind or another. Now, about the plan, I just want to say briefly, because I may do some more videos on creative writing, and the plan would probably take up a lot more space and time. But some authors plan every detail out. They have lots and lots of planning papers or on their computer. Others do almost no planning and just start writing, and everyone else is somewhere in between. And there is no right or wrong way to do it. So I have read and listened to many professional authors, and they will give you different answers. They don't all give you the same answer because they all have different experiences and how writing works for them. So you'll have to figure that out a little bit. Now, I would say if you're doing a longer story, and especially a novel, you probably should do some planning. You don't have to have every single detail planned out, but I think it's good to have some planning, and then I think it's also good to have what I call a running plan. Probably the wrong terminology, but keeping track is what you need to do, because if it's an especially long story or novel, a book, then you want to make sure that you have continuity. So you don't suddenly want characters changing. So they were left-handed, now they're right-handed, and that wasn't part of your plot. It was just an accident, a mistake, and you've seen that probably in movies where all of a sudden something switches, they're wearing this a different shirt, but it's in the exact same scene. There was no chance of them changing that shirt, so there's a continuity issue there, and they didn't pick it up before they finished production. So in your story, you do want to make sure you have that, and it's good for you because sometimes you're not able to just you can't write the whole story in one day, so you're coming back often over weeks or months, and you have to remind yourself who's who and what's what, and it's a lot easier if you have a plan to start and then you kind of keep adding, and you can use index cards or you can use on your computer uh, different platforms to keep track of the characters and of the setting and of the series of events, all of the things that we've been talking about. Stories sometimes start to write themselves. So even if you have a very detailed plan, you might find that as you're writing the story, it begins to veer off to the left or the right or whatever, and that's okay. You might have to tweak your plan and just change it up as the story changes up. Sometimes the characters start talking to you, and in a sense, and begin to write the story. Uh, Now, even if you don't have a plan, do some brainstorming because that can help you to get some of the character ideas, some of the settings, some of the plot. It's a little bit like a plan, but it's not a fully detailed plan, but it can excite you and it can get you ready to start writing. So I would suggest doing a little bit of a brainstorm, just taking 10-15 minutes to begin. You can begin with one of these or all of them and just sort of jot some point form notes down to get you started. Also, have fun. It's so important to enjoy the creative writing process. It is sometimes work, that's true, but try to enjoy it. Try to get excited at the beginning because if you can get engaged with your own story and involved with it, and you love the characters, even if they're bad characters sometimes, it can help you to write the story. So it's Ron Johnson from L.T.L Tutoring Central. Keep learning and keep having fun and keep writing and keep having fun. Let me know how it goes. If you like, you can send me your short story. When I have time, I will read through them and I'll give you some comments as well. Bye bye for now.